This is Real Sports Talk, Rumack and the Greek, featuring Billy the Greek and Stormin Norman Rumack. Brought to you by the good people at Cosa and Carpets for Life.
Wow, then there he is. What a close-up. Obviously, if you guys don't know by now, I'm Billy the Greek. Happy. Usually we air the program on Mondays. Unfortunately, circumstances beyond our control. You know, I know a few of you guys sent messages. We're a little worried. You missed me. You missed what I got to say. But rest assured, I'm back and ready for action. But here's the issue, and it's a really tough for me to say that in regards to my good friend Stormin Norman. I've come to the decision, you know, you never want to really cut a guy. You never really want to tell a guy, you know, you're washed up. And you know, I'm a caring guy. I really love human beings and Norm too. So it was the toughest conversation. Tough conversation. No, I'm not the toughest. And you know, it just got to the point in time where I decided that, you know what, really, it's all about me, man. Who is this Ham and Egger man from 1982, man? This washed up has-been voice. It's all about the Greek, man. So here's what I did, man. I told Rumack, take a week off, relax a little bit. I'll think about it. If you send me, if you grovel a little bit, that's a little for the Greek, man. It'll bring you back. But in the meantime, auditioning for the role, maybe even part-time. You'll see right now, this guy's got a good set of hair. Articulate, like this guy's almost as smart as me, for crying out loud. Articulate guy, savvy individual, knows the world of hockey inside out. And you know what, Norm, man, think of Wally Pipp when you think of Norm Rumack. Paul Bruno, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for being around, man. I appreciate it.
Billy, glad to be with you, and sorry that Norm isn't joining us tonight. I always enjoy watching you guys duel and kind of being a referee, but it's me and you tonight, and let's get at it.
Here's what I'll tell you, Paul. Obviously, thanks for doing this. It's a real pleasure, and it's got to be like it's got to be quite an exciting moment for yourself to spend a little time with a guy of my caliber.
I was just thinking the same thing from your perspective, actually.
Who's kidding who, man? I'm nobody. That's Paul Bruno. DraftKings, RotoWire. He's got his nose stuck inside the NHL, man. 8 ways to Sunday. He knows more than 9/10 of us, man, myself included. So it's a pleasure to have you with this show, by the way. And we're very happy. I'm very happy to be able to call Cosa my partner and the ability to sponsor the show. We've had a long-standing relationship, and I don't know how they put up with me, but I appreciate their support very much. I respect them very much, and will do everything in my power to provide as much not only entertainment, but as much of a connection to the harness industry as I can. We're big fans of the harness industry here, and want to do everything in our power to put the spotlight rather somewhere where it deserves on some of the best people that professional sports has to offer, and those are the people and the drivers and all the horsemen at Flamborough, at Mohawk, at Woodbine Mohawk. So we appreciate their support, and also we have a real piece of work on board too. That's Nikki Borsch from Carpets for Life, and God damn, I love that guy to death. And again, man, we'll do everything in our power to make the relationship glowing first. But as for that, enough about that. Paul Bruno, obviously, you're an objective observer. You know, I got Rumack here, and he's for the better part of the last couple of years, he's got this hate on for the Leafs. So finally, I get somebody that's an objective observer to comment. How excited are you in terms of the last few days and what you see? How's your hope meter in Leafland, and what's the future look like given the O'Reilly acquisition, Akari, and kind of what lies ahead?
Well, I'm pretty excited because they needed to bolster their bottom six here in their lineup. That's kind of been a big deciding factor in losing series to the Bruins and the Tampa club among others in the last several years here. And he really fills that void of another center. Hear me out here now. I said another center. They have moved John Tavares over the wing. I do not like that move.
Whoa.
I love the fact that they had a big night last night. It's very nice to be able to do that once in a while. But the deal for me is this guy was brought in to lengthen the Leafs roster and create matchup problems. The way you do that is play him at center, where he's played his whole career. He's won a Conn Smythe Trophy, been one among the best defensive forwards in the history of the game, really, and a contender for the Selke in each of the last 4 seasons, playing at that center position. And I mean, his offensive skills, despite what you saw last night, you're not going to see that every night out of him. I think the best way to use him is create a third scoring line around him and let Tavares play where he's played his whole career.
Hold on, Paul. I introduced you, Paul. Hold on. As one of the sharpest minds in the game, Paul. Hold on now, man. You know, and again, I love you, but hold on. Were you not in slight? And again, what happened yesterday is not necessarily as Keefe proclaimed after the game. What happened yesterday is not necessarily how things will develop moving forward. He has options, and one of those is playing O'Reilly at center. Options is never a bad thing for a coach. But I don't know. Did you not watch the game? Did you not enjoy Paul Bruno that first period of hockey when O'Reilly, Tavares, and Marner looked like the best line since I don't know when, Paul Bruno?
Hold on a second. I've got some technical issues here. 1 sec. Sorry, Billy.
Don't be sorry, Paul.
I'm losing a connection.
Apologize to the fans for saying that Ryan O'Reilly should be a third-line center.
Well, I'm telling you that what's Tampa's edge been against the Leafs? It's their bottom 6 that has been feasting on the Leafs and creating a matchup headache. So that being said, now they've got that in hand, and they can say, okay, Nick Paul, here's your challenge for tonight. That we're going to get you playing against Ryan O'Reilly. I mean, that's what you got to do with this team. And I think the other thing that you're going to see is they're going to shuffle things up with the wingers, and they've got options there too. They got talent in the likes of Alex Kerfoot. They've got, I mean, Pierre Engvall is a guy that's an option. We've talked about him off the air to fill out a possible third line. But what about putting Kerfoot up on the second line, and maybe Calle Jarnkrok goes on to the third line, and they surround O'Reilly. So all of a sudden, you've got 3 credible scoring lines where you had 2 before. I mean,
hold on, Paul. Here's the question, though: do you need 3 credible scoring lines to win come playoff time? Do you need that? Number one. Number two, if you look at the way these guys looked, and that's obviously a minute sample size, obviously looked pretty impressive. You'd be a fool to break that up moving forward until they show you a reason to break it up, number one. So as we jump, I would say, keep it down, man. This dog's causing a ruckus in here. Here's what I'll tell you. Any Leaf fan that is anything more than cautiously optimistic, if you're more, Paul Bruno, I don't know if you are, if you're more than cautiously optimistic about the Buds, I don't know, maybe you're pounding them back too hard. Here's the issue I have, and again, what do I know? You go into a Tampa Bay series, which unfortunately was decided 3 weeks into the season. That's a whole nother story, right? But here's the issue. Can you win a 7-game series against Tampa Bay, Paul Bruno, with Ilya Samsonov, not Sergei Samsonov, Ilya Samsonov in net against Vasilevsky? How do you feel about that? Because that's the one area in terms of matchups where you're, you know how they rate matchups and you go around? Vasilevsky's a 10, and our guy might be a 6.5. Can you beat him in a 7-game series?
That's why you have to win the other aspects decisively. So let's do a deeper dive, Billy, for a second. Let's examine the Tampa roster, and then we'll come back to the Maple Leafs roster. Currently, the first line, Braden Point, Nikita Kucherov, Brandon Hagel, who's had a fantastic year. What an ad he's been for the Lightning. Then on the second line, you got Stamkos centering Alex Killorn and Anthony Cirelli. That's not quite the equal of the Leafs second line, if you ask me. When you can put Mitch Marner and John Tavares and you or me on a second line, I like our chances in that matchup. Then you go into the third line. You got Nick Paul, Patrick Maroon, and Ross Cotton. Ross Cotton scored a very important goal in the Stanley Cup final a couple of years ago. Pat Maroon's a bit of a headache because he's a very physical presence. And Nick Paul was the guy that had the dagger against us last year. But they don't scare me if you line them up against a line led by Ryan O'Reilly and put, say, a Kerfoot or Calle Jarnkrok on a wing and fill in with Engvall on the other side. So I think the Leafs can get the edge over the Tampa club offensively. Then let's look at the defensive situation. Of course, the Leafs don't have anybody the equal Victor Hedman, and then Mikhail Sergachev is anchoring the second line, having a nice season. But beyond that, do the likes of Zach Bogosian, Eric Cernak, Nick Perbix, and Ian Cole scare you? They don't scare me. And the Leafs have a depth on defense that equals those guys. Morgan Riley's picked up his game of late. I know he had a bit of a tough time.
All right, hold on. Before you jump any further, I'll ask you a question. If you had your druthers and you were general manager, would you rather have Tampa Bay's D that includes the two guys that you mentioned, or Toronto's allotment of 6? If you could decide of the two, which would you rather go with, man? Because as you mentioned, Hedman stands head and shoulders above any of the other 11 guys that you mentioned.
Well, in the season-long stats, this is both clubs against everybody in the league. Who has the better team goals against average right now? You might be surprised, but it's the Maple Leafs. So the Maple Leafs rank in the top 5, and that's because they play a better defensive structure overall. They've played a better structure overall defensively than Tampa has, and it might surprise your listeners to hear me say that they have been ranking in the top 5 in goals against all season long with this defense that's been in flux. They've been without Morgan Riley. They were forced to play third and second pairing guys up in the lineup for much of the year, and then they've done so and got a record like they have because the team has played that defensive structure to a T. And you've got the best that I've seen out of Timothy Liljegren, for instance, to date in his career. Justin Hall, who was a whipping boy for this club, played some of his best hockey in that time. So out of necessity, these guys were thrown into the fire and they responded very well. And that experience is going to serve them well. But one guy on the Leaf defense, Billy, that we got to spend a minute to talk about is Connor Timmins. People have been filling my head with, he's been a great addition. He's this, he's that. He's played well. But he's prone to the brain fart like Justin Hall has been for much of his time in Toronto. And now we're seeing it with great regularity from a second player in Timmins. I'll remind you, we talked about this earlier off the air, but in the game against Chicago, he came up and joined the rush when the Leafs already had a 3-on-2. He made it a 4-on-2, and he went to crash the front of the net. And then they had a shot that went wide, rimmed the boards. Chicago turns up ice. Bing, bang, boom, it's in the net on a 2-on-1. He didn't have to crash the net and rush out of his position to make that a 4-on-2. They had 3 skilled players on the ice ahead of him with that advantage, and instead it wound up being a decisive factor. He's caused issues like that because he's jumped too far into the offensive zone. These guys on defense that don't score like a Victor Hedman, they got to be reminded, stay in your end of the ice, play your position properly, and don't cause the odd man rushes coming the other way. That's been critical.
Well, first of all, the one thing that I would say, maybe that's more of a tactical error in the way the gray-haired guy that coaches the club wants to deploy his club. Number 2, really, what do we expect? You're talking about a guy in Timmins, man. That I don't know. You found him from Arizona. You didn't exactly peel him off the defense of the mid '80s. Montreal Canadiens. You found the guy off the scrap heap. What do you want, Paul? You want a Norris Trophy guy as your 6th guy from Arizona for $100 a game? That doesn't happen. Here's the question that I'll ask you. And in all honesty, you mentioned the Leafs and their defensive, I don't know, you want to call it prowess or what have you, and it is surprising. But here's what I'll say. That and 50 cents, man, won't get you a cup of coffee in the playoffs. It's one thing to play lockdown hockey or defensive hockey in November, December, January, okay? But can that translate into playoff success? More specifically, I believe, and again, what do I know, man? I've been watching sports 40 years, man. Probably the sharpest mind in business, but besides the point. Do you have confidence that in terms of some of the physicality and some of the ruggedness required along the walls, Paulie, along the walls, man, big part of the game's along the walls, would you believe that the 6 guys that you mentioned possess the abilities to flourish in that style of game when it's a little tighter, a little more physical, need to clear the front of the net? Or would you be somebody like me that suggests the Leafs, in order to secure a higher possibility of success, should and would and need to look for a guy to slot somewhere between 2 and 5 in terms of their back end? And would you go get one? And at what price?
I would definitely I expect that they're searching everywhere to get a defenseman that has a physical upside. I mean, I heard most recently, Billy, I don't know if you heard the same, but they've been priced out of the Luke Shen sweepstakes. He's going to go elsewhere because the Leafs simply don't have or are unwilling to pay the price to get him for what's being asked. That's the rumors that I'm hearing right up to the minute before we came on the air here. But there are a host of other defensive defensemen that may be expendable in other team circumstances that they should be looking at, and they need to upgrade that physical component, because as you say, if it comes down to a grinding type series and really possessing, blocking out in front of the net, they have to have somebody who is more willing to do that than a lot of the guys that they have on this defense. So
I'll throw out a name at you. And I've been a long-time proponent. Again, he's a polarizing guy. A lot of guys like him, a lot of guys don't. A guy like, for me, and he's like kind of a slimy hockey player, and I kind of like slimy guys, Paul, so I'm not going to go into detail, but he's a kind of guy that might, I don't know, man, might spear you in the face, might slew for you, and that's Radko Gudas from Florida. For me, and I don't know what the asking price would be, but for me, in terms of putting him either in whole spot at number 4, or even if you slot him a little further and manage his playing time, he's the kind of guy, if I'm in the GM seat, I'm picking up that phone.
Well, he's definitely one of the guys that they've been linked to. Whether he's going to be made available to a team in his division, that's another consideration. And if Florida can get past that part, I wonder what their ask would be. And if they are truly shopping him around the league, you can bet the Leafs would not be the only suitor, because that guy is a real good option in terms of filling the need that you and I both understand is there for this club right now. So good on you for identifying him. There are a few other guys out there too that might fit the bill, and I'm sure the Leafs are combing the airwaves and running up a phone tab to find that right now, because that's really the glaring issue with this club. But the option for the Leafs, though, I keep coming back to the fact that they need to explore ways to augment areas where they do have an advantage, to widen that gap. So that's why I keep coming back to the fact that, I mean, it's been great to see O'Reilly have a great start as a second liner, but they got to stretch this offense to really gain a big edge over Tampa in terms of the offensive flow of the game, play a run and gun style, and beat them down by outscoring them. And you're not going to beat this team in 2-1 games, a succession of 2-1 games. That's advantage Tampa.
And therein lies the issue. Funny enough that I'm not the biggest fan of the dubious one, and I've said some pretty harsh things over the years. The guy's never, I don't know, he won't take my calls, he will never come on this show. Man, he considers me too little, man, not important guy, but it's his opinion. Anyways, I'm going to help this guy out. I'm going to do the best I can, Paul. You know I'm a man of the people. So next week we have Rick Dudley on, special advisor for the Florida Panthers. So I'm going to have a talk with Dutch, maybe off air, off camera, man, and I'm going to get the ball rolling. I'm going to bring Gudas into the blue and white, into the uniform. And anyways, I'll try, man. I'll give my best efforts. But when you're talking about a low-scoring game, no matter how you want to run and gun, Paul, obviously, we've seen in the past, you want to play a certain way, but the opposition, unfortunately, has something to say about it, right? So for the majority of time, if history is any indication, right, you can win 5-4. We know the Leafs can win 5-4. No problem. But they will need to win either game 5, 6, or 7 if it goes that far. They'll need to win 2-1. Tampa Bay's not a kind of club historically, as we saw last year, when Cooper locks down and they play a tight game, they're tough to penetrate, right? So you're going to need to win a game like that. And for me, if I'm sitting in that seat, I ask myself, you remember last year, Matthews, Marner, Nylander, they caught a lot of grief, didn't they, for their performance in Game 7, right?
Yes, they did.
All right. Let me ask you this. How many points and what contribution in Game 7 did Stamkos, Kucherov, and Point make?
0.
So why did Tampa Bay win the game? You know when they won the game, Paul, the series? They won it at the trade deadline. They found a guy. They found a guy that served a purpose, and he came up humongous in Game 7.
Yes,
humongous, and that's Nick Paul. So where is Dubas going to find a similar guy O'Reilly's one piece, but where's he going to find a more under the radar guy that steps up in the hugest moments? Because you know, Paul, from your experiences, the biggest difference in terms of those elimination games, you know who the heroes are? Somebody we would never expect. And for the better part of the Dubas's tenure, he's made attempts to find those guys, brought in this guy, brought in that guy, and they haven't panned out. So you know what this is on? This is on Dubas and his Leaf scouting staff. You have to bring in a guy, whoever you want, and you got to make sure that that guy or those guys in crunch time step up and make a difference. All you need really, Paul, when you think about it, from your role guys, all you need is to win you one game, make you one play, score one goal, be Nick Paul for one day, man, right? And the Leafs have never had that.
You know what? I also was hoping that they'd make another move at the deadline, and that was take a look at the Chicago roster. And you may anticipate where I'm going with this, but he made a big difference in the game on Sunday against the Leafs with a 4.9. That was Max Domi. Max Domi in Toronto. I'll tell you what he would bring here. He would bring that snarl. This guy, when he snaps, he beats the snot out of people in terms of scrappiness. So that's another threat, almost a nuclear one, when you consider how crazy this guy gets when he gets the physical bug in him. Too bad he doesn't hit people in the regular flow of play. That's not his game. But when he drops the gloves, he sends a loud message, and that will translate through the whole dressing room if they've got a guy that with that kind of threat that they can employ. I mean, he's not 6'4", 220 pounds, but I've never seen him lose a fight. Okay. And that's not the only thing that he brings. He brings a ton of skill. He did come up with a 4-point effort against the Leafs in support of Patrick Kane's hat-trick last Sunday that you saw. And he did it with the style of play that would just augment what the Leafs already have offensively. Figure him in a third line role and helping out that way, the bottom six as well. And don't forget, he has ties to Mitch Marner as well, that London thing. And playing in the blue and white for him would be a dream come true. You'd get the best out of Max Domi that nobody's seen yet.
You know what? I'll tell you this. You're a lot smarter than Rumack, eh? And I'll tell you this. Here's the only question I'd have for you. I completely agree with you. But Domi has been available Domi's made sense in my mind for the better part of 4 years, and has been available on some level for acquisition on a low cost return for the better part of 4 years, and he's not wearing a blue and white. So that tells me, again, you've had chances to get this guy along the way if you wanted him, right? He fits perfectly. But if Dubas hasn't tried to acquire this guy 2, 3, 4 years ago, when he was relatively like a 10-cent guy in terms of the hockey market, maybe they don't like him upstairs. Maybe they've scratched him off their to-do list. Otherwise, you probably would have already been here, wouldn't he?
He would have, but then you're looking at a guy who had a bad reputation as maybe a bit of a malcontent in other environments. When he was with a couple other clubs earlier in his career, it didn't really pan out for him. He had one good year in Montreal, really, but he had a terrible time in Columbus and really bailed on that team. Didn't fit in Carolina. Didn't work out there either. But I think putting on the blue and white would be the dream come true, and that's where I think you have to pull at that notion that he's a Toronto guy getting a chance to live out the childhood dream. I mean, his idol was Matt Sundin. His father, Ty Domi, they made their bones in Toronto together. And here's a chance for him to take it to another generation in his family. And what better incentive is there than to play under the bright lights of the city where you were born? And so
no doubt about it. And funny enough, you mentioned Matt Sundin and Ty. I go back a little ways, Limelights and Tuesday nights, Bauhaus, this and that. I'll tell you this, Matt Sundin, man, he liked his after hours. He liked to enjoy the nightlife in Toronto. But I'll tell you this, he never walked around in any club that I've seen him at, or any club in his lifetime without Ty Domi riding shotgun. That's just for a little insight, man. Those two were tighter than stink. And then again, Sundin's not a dumb guy, man. He just to make sure that the enforcer's there. But the issue again, getting back to his boy, is obviously clubs like Chicago know that Dubas, for anybody that knows on the other end, if you're playing poker with Dubas, you know, man, that this guy is a little desperate, Paulie, because if he doesn't produce, you know where he's going to be. He's going to be replacing you and Norm next year on the show, right? He better produce, man. He knows his job's on the line. This is a rerun of Anthopoulos, 2016, almost kind of, sort of, in some ways. So he knows that, right? And rival GMs know that too. So how high are you willing to go in terms of player cost to acquire a guy like Domi? Are you willing? Are you willing? Say Chicago turns around, Paul Bruno, and said, all right, you want this guy? All right, give us nice, and you can have him. Well, what does Paul Bruno say?
I say no. That's one untouchable prospect. But you lead me into a comment, though. The Leafs have gotten to where they are without dealing any of their other prospects. They've got a couple of Finnish guys, Topi Niemela and Ronnie Hirvonen, that I would be willing to trade one or both of those guys for the right piece. And I think that's the level of desperation that they should be exploring. If you want to use the word desperation to fill out the rest of their roster, they've got to be willing to part with a prospect because, as you implied, they don't have much in the way of draft capital to spend anymore. I don't think teams want to say, okay, we'll take your 2026 first rounder. They're not going to wait that. They're not going to want something that's far out in terms of time horizon. So that it's going to be now a time to address the Leafs prospect pool. And what a shame that Nick Robertson is a guy that you can't even include in those discussions because he would be right behind these as one of the top prospects in their situation if he was healthy, but that's a problem. So that's why I'm saying look at the Finnish guys and say maybe you'll see one or both of those guys in a trade offer. And what about even Rasmus Sandin in terms of an expendable piece on the Leafs defense? So they have some quality that they can offer in trade to get a player of Domi's ilk. And you don't stop at Max Domi. You can look at a Brock Besser as maybe another bit of firepower that you want to add. Do you want to go and search for Vlad Gavrikov with Columbus? I've heard he's all but earmarked for the Boston Bruins. And, that's one deal that the Leafs have to try and trump. You don't want one of the two nuclear options that you're going to face in the playoffs to get any stronger. So you got to make sure you outbid them. So if the Gavrikov is out there, that might be a defenseman that Leafs should be addressing.
This just in that Robertson apparently was seen in Dunedin, Florida, hanging out with Nate Pearson. So those two guys, those two beauties are hanging out together. Hopefully and again, we'll get to the Blue Jays after the break. We're in a couple more minutes here. Then we're going to shoot it to the Coastal Classic. We're going to get to Blue Jays. And, me and Paulie are like, we're Dallas Cowboy guys, so we don't give a rat's ass if you like it or not. We're going to talk a little NFL, Cowboy football, and what have you. But I'll close this on this note. So we've come to the point in time. I think we're basically on the same page here in terms of needs. Both of us would like a couple of at least another guy up front, man, that might stick you in the face, that plays a tough game, like an Achari, but kind of a little more on steroids, a little rougher, nastier version of that kid, kind of, and somebody on the back end, probably, right? So give me realistically, read the future in the tea leaves, and give me realistically two guys in your estimation that are going to be wearing Leaf uniforms come trade deadline time.
Well, I want to say Vladislav Gavrikov is one of the options, and you mentioned the other guy, Radko Gudas, on the blue line. And then up front, let's dream big and say Brock Besser is a guy that I'd love to see on their offense. You want the depth to be such that they have three powerful lines from 1 to 9. And so getting a guy like Besser, you're talking dream option. That's the dream option that I see there on the forward lines. And on the back end, I gave you a couple of names that would fill out the roster with a little more size and gumption than they have right now.
And again, time will tell. I believe that the one thing we're confident is, as hockey observers and quasi-Leaf fans, is that there needs to be a little more done, because, as we said, we're cautiously optimistic again. But every Leaf fan believes there's some more that needs to be done, and I hope that Kyle Dubas realizes too. I hope he's not secure when he goes to sleep and believes the heavy lifting's done, because if he believes that to be the case, he might be again on the unemployment line come when the playoffs start, May?
Yeah, or mid-April, let's say.
Mid-April. So by May, he could be looking for a job. So again, Kyle, smarten up, man. I've been telling you for months to trade O'Reilly. You finally listened to me. Keep at it. Keep tuning in, man. And it's funny, Paul, because I find a lot of guys, especially these guys that these guys don't respect the Greek, Paul. I've been telling these guys for years, man, how to win. Like, if you put me, honest to God, man, I'm a kind of guy, I'm a 5-tool guy, man. I should be and could be not only the GM of the Leafs, but then travel back and forth, be the GM of the Blue Jays, and take Masai's spot, and I'll probably have a better record than all three of those jokers, man, and more championships. Anyways, man, and you know what's the sick thing, Paul? And this is why I'm not safe, like, in society at large. I actually believe this in my head, man. I'm a sick bastard, but we'll get to more of that on the other side. In the meantime, enjoy this week's Costa Classic, Nikki Borsch, me and Paul Bruno. Catch you on the other side.
The crowd is going wild. And they're off, and as expected, Taurus Dream fires out of there. Likely Lad for Bernt Lindstedt, the heavy favorite, and Overhaul flashes speed on the inside, moves up for early position with Campbell. Around the first turn, McNichol guaranteed it, and he is on top. Taurus Dream, Likely Lad, and Overhaul. Here comes the Catman with ENS Snapshot, and off stride goes and Overhaul. My God, he's off stride. And this opens the race wide open now as they pass the quarter. Taurus Dream, ENS Snapshot up into second, clear the trouble. Likely Lad is third. The opening quarter was 28-1. Gap of 5 lengths now. Chip Hooray being chased along in the fourth spot. And they battle up the backstretch here. Duke of York is fifth now, up the backstretch. Like a Prayer is racing sixth. Malabar Maple is seventh. Then it's Really Suspicious, followed by Chipmate, and Overhaul is still on a dead gallop, and it's Taurus Dream. McNichol is taking no prisoners today. He's parking out the Catman with ENS Snapshot, and just loving it on the inside is Likely Lad and Bernt Lindstedt. A perfect trip there. They have 55-2, a quick 27-1 second quarter. It's long shot Taurus Dream at 14-1, who leads it by 2. ENS Snapshot on the outside, a brutal journey. Likely Lad is third. Off the cones, here comes Chip Hooray, who's called upon for trot. Duke of York sets up a rally now. Like a Prayer's right behind him. Also coming late is Malabar Maple. We might see some closers here off the quick pace, 1:23-2. In the stretch, it's Taurus Dream trying to go all the way. McNichol goes to work. Taurus Dream, Chip Hooray. Ledford's got him in gear. He's got open road. Duke of York is there. And fanning way wide is Like a Prayer. A wild finish. It's Chip Hooray to the front. Chip Hooray. Like a Prayer. A final surge on the outside will be second. Duke of York third. Chip Hooray. Shouted from the mountaintops. Chuck Sylvester's fourth Hamiltonian. And Eric Ledford wins his debut in this big race. Chip Hooray.
By now, you know the name COSA TV, an industry leader producing unique, high-quality digital content promoting harness racing in Ontario. Features, virtual programming, live events, and more. COSA TV has it covered. Follow our social media channels and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube page to view the latest content. And if you're looking to bet your favorite Ontario track, check out hpibet.com. COSA TV, taking Ontario racing global.
Welcome to Carpets for Life. For over 30 years, we have been servicing both residential and commercial clients in the sales and installation of custom stair runners on wall-to-wall areas. Our team prides itself in honesty with a regard of professionalism and customer satisfaction. Our many testimonials and continuous referrals is a testament of the quality of workmanship we provide. We strive to ensure a happy customer is a Carpets for Life customer.
Welcome back, folks. Billy the Greek, joined by Paul Bruno, filling in for a Norman Rumack, who's on a paid suspension, a little sabbatical, reviewing his performance to this point in time. So give him a week off. But Paul, did you watch? Were you watching the race in between the break?
No, I wasn't able to.
No.
But I'm intrigued by horse racing, but I'm not shoulder deep into the thing like you are. But I think it's something I'm going to check out in the very near future when the weather turns here in Toronto.
Absolutely. If you ever get a chance, well, you gotta bring a couple 50s, take them down to Mohawk. You know what? There's honestly get goosebumps when I see the wire, and obviously have a different relationship to both the thoroughbred and harness industry in terms of just straight active addiction, but that's a different story. There's nothing quite like a home stretch, especially, and most importantly, when you got a winning ticket, man. But for those of you that obviously are not sick degenerates like myself, man, it's a great evening out. great spreads at Mohawk, great entertainment. And again, I've had a chance to interview a lot of people. If you guys follow me, you could look back on the Greeks page, Ryan O'Reilly's. I've had a lot of guys on, but the harness guys that I've had on, including Chantel Mitchell, trainer from Woodbine, Chrissy Christoforu, Waples, and a slew of other guys. They're the best guys. They're some of the best down-to-earth guys in the business, right? And again, I can't say it anymore. It's rare for like a guy like me I've been doing this for a while, but it's rare for me to be able to pick up a phone. Right? If I picked up a phone and tried to get a Toronto Maple Leaf, they would laugh at me, man. I pick up a phone and want to have Waples come on or Chrissy Christoforu. They're all hard and they want to come on. And the last piece I'll say is a shout out to Kenny Middleton, who's the track announcer at Mohawk, one of the best in the business. Reach out to Kenny anytime. If you're a horse guy, send him a message. He'll get back to you in 5 minutes. Those are the kind of guys they are down at Mohawk Park. So,
well, if I can just add, one of the neatest conversations I've had in the media, interviewing people at Ontario Sportsman of the Year award dinners and stuff like that, Sandy Hawley comes to mind.
Yeah.
You may not know it, but he's a huge hockey fan as well.
Yeah.
But one of the nicest guys I've ever had the opportunity to interview in my many years in the sports media. Just a terrific guy, very knowledgeable about not only the horse racing industry, obviously he's a legend there, but in the world of hockey and the major pro sports in North America, he's pretty fluent in all of them, and particularly hockey.
I've had
a joy to.
I had the interview to interview Sandy in the past, so I've had him on the show before. And the interesting story, again, back in the archives, interesting story that at one point in time he was a timekeeper in Los Angeles in the early 90s, and just loves the game. And again, beautiful guy, and just a testament to that whole industry at large. Speaking of industries, obviously, despite the fact that when you look outside, there's especially up here in Scarborough, Ontario, I don't know about Paul in Rosedale if it's snowing, but up here in Scarborough, man, I'm looking at snow outside. But here's the nice thing, man, that come this Sunday, if you got a nice LCD TV and remotes that work, you can watch a Toronto Blue Jays spring training game, Paul.
Yes, you can. And there's a little bit of excitement here. They've kind of changed their focus on this team. I mean, we were used to seeing the barrio at the end of the dugout and the home run jacket and all this dancing around. I think they've added some guys that are going to put a stop to that and make it more of a we're down to business now, folks, and we're going to play hard-nosed, aggressive baseball and on both sides of the game. Their defense has been lacking. They really addressed it with some of the off-season moves that they made this winter, and I'm excited to see what that product looks like when they hit the field.
Devil's advocate here, obviously, as you're quite aware, a little bit of a hockey guy, but I know a thing or two about the game of baseball, Paul. As you know, as I've said on numerous occasions, I am the skipper of the would-be junior national champion East Shore Bulldogs. So obviously, I know a thing or two about the game. Here's what I'd say, and again, I have no position because really can go either way. To me, again, obviously there's no barrio. Obviously, the management, including Shapiro, Atkins, manager, all decided that they wanted to not only change the some of the defensive improvements, but they wanted to change the culture. Now I'll ask you a question. All right, fine. You changed the culture. Paul Bruno. All right, no problem. But was the culture really the problem, Paul? When you're winning 8-2 against Seattle in the 6th inning, was the problem Teoscar Hernandez or Gurriel wasn't even playing? Was Teoscar Hernandez the problem, or the barrio, the home run jacket? You know what the problem was? You know what the Achilles heel was? And again, you're moving forward a year. You brought in Swanson. All right, you signed Green, who might show up in August or September, and who knows what you're going to get. Right? And you're bringing back the exact same bullpen. You're bringing back, and again, I know a thing or two, you're bringing back 4 or 5 guys, right? I don't want to name them all because I don't know them off the top of my head. You're bringing back 4 or 5 guys that on any championship club are low leverage guys. And you're putting them in, you're running the same guys out there. You think Swanson at 92 with a slider and a thing? All right, fine. Maybe he's better than I think. But at what point in time do you start to say, wait a minute, man, we didn't address properly the need that was most prevalent in terms of success and failure in the Toronto Blue Jays? And I'll tell you this, Paul, it wasn't the barrio. It wasn't the barrio. If you want to talk about change, all right, but it wasn't the barrio.
Well, I am going to say that they had a thing or two to do with it because of base running errors. You mentioned a couple of those guys. They were They were home run hitters. They hit for some average, but they killed this team with poor defensive judgment and poor work on the base paths. Kevin Kiermaier and Dalton Varsho are going to change that dramatically.
Okay.
In terms of their offensive abilities. Don't forget, you're also talking about the fact that there's some aspects of baseball that are going to be changing now. The teams can't shift like they did before.
Mm-hmm.
And Kiermaier particularly has already gone on record saying that shift business has really cost him a lot of hits over the years. His speed is going to be a real problem for opposition when he lays down those bunts and when he slaps the ball around the infield into the holes that normally would have been loaded in defending him. He's going to get more infield hits out of this, and Varsho is another guy who's going to capitalize that way. And then I don't have to tell you about their defensive prowess is a major upgrade over the guys that they are replacing. Varsho, for instance, was the top defender in all of baseball among outfielders for his defensive range. That's also already been noted. And Kiermaier is a perennial candidate for Golden Glove work in the outfield. That also allows them the luxury of moving George Springer over to right field, where there's going to be less pressure on him, as instead of the captain of the outfield, he gets to play a corner role, and that's going to be less stressful on him. And the one knock that I've had against him since he's been with the Blue Jays is too many days where he's not able to play. This is going to change all of that too. And he's a plus outfielder as well. So they've strengthened the defensive portion of their outlook dramatically, in my opinion, without sacrificing too much offense. You're going to get left-handed batters in a lineup that was predominantly right-handed. They would field.
Go ahead. I'm just giving you the warning sign that I'm formulating a rebuttal. Go ahead.
Well, in years past, particularly last season, they loaded up against left-handed pitchers rather, with 8 or 9 right-handed bats, but they did much the same against right-handed pitchers. Now they have the luxury of putting in a couple of left-handers. And then you alluded to the Jays bullpen. Well, they made it easy for opposing bullpens to load up against them too and say, you know what, we don't have to worry about taking a guy out after 3 batters because they're all batting the same way against us. We don't have to worry about this mix and match stuff that goes on in most other parks. When you play the Jays, you didn't have to worry about switching out because they've got a left-handed batter coming up. They didn't have hardly any left-handed batters of any consequence for the last season. That was a major.
Hold on. Didn't they have Munenori Kawasaki?
Yeah, he's singing karaoke back in his homeland right now. I think that's where
Bush party time for the kid, eh? One of the most, and it's funny. Toronto's such a funny city, man. You fall in love with some of the weirdest cats. Hockey, you fell in love with what's his name, man? Brad Marsh was like a legend in Toronto. Louis Franceschetti, Munenori Kawasaki. Toronto sports fans, man, they're a little bit on the weird side. Here's what I say in response to your comments on the Blue Jays. Again, the need to bring some left-handed hitters in on a obviously predominantly right-handed hitting lineup is obvious to anybody that watches the game. But here's the issue. You brought in a guy in Kevin Kiermaier. Okay, that's fine. If you fast forward, Paul Bruno, and you tell me Kevin Kiermaier is going to play 135 games and stay healthy, I'll put my thumbs up. You know what the chances of that are? I don't know, 40-60 maybe, 50-50 tops. We're talking about a guy with a history of injuries. We're talking a guy coming off a hip surgery. All right. If you tell me, Paul Bruno, and you can guarantee in the way Jimmy Johnson guaranteed, in 3, I don't forget the exact quote. If you can guarantee me that Brandon Belt will get 400 at-bats, right? I'm going to say, you know what? That's awesome. If you can guarantee me that the move to right field is going to alleviate so much stress from George Springer, he's going to play in 145 games. If you can guarantee me that, Paul Bruno, then I'm on board. But there's question marks. This can go sideways just as easily. Look at the Blue Jays from this perspective. And again, I know I'm talking about Mitch White and the other guy. What's his name, man? The lefty. What's the lefty's name now?
You're talking in the starting rotation?
Yeah, what's the lefty's name? The Japanese kid.
Yeah, I'm trying to come up with it.
Jesus, we forgot about him so soon, man.
It's Kikuchi. You say Kikuchi.
Kikuchi. So here's the deal. If Kikuchi and White are fighting and vying for the number 5 spot, right? Okay, fine. That's reality. Then what does that tell you about 6, 7, 8, and 9? And number two, heaven forbid, man. And the Blue Jays, one of the strengths they have is the durability of the starting rotation. Barrios is never hurt. Gosman's got a history of health, and Manoah's built like an ox. You take Manoah or Gosman away, I don't know, Paul. You flip the next slider and you put him on the shelf for a year for a Tommy John. You put Springer out with, I don't know, what a litany of injuries, right? This can turn into a 80 and 82 club just as easily, man, just as easily.
No doubt. There's injury concerns, but you mentioned Springer. He got over 500 at bats last season, so
yeah,
that's not too bad. I'll take that as a low bar for his output this year, and I'll say I'll take that. If he can get another 500 at bats, I expect to see more. Kiermaier has been able to play over 120 games in 2 of the last 4 seasons. Why not make it 3 out of 5 in a different circumstance? Right. They say that he's had a chance to get rehabilitated, and he says he's feeling like he hasn't felt this way in a few years. So I'm hoping that he's honest in that.
I say a lot of things. I say a lot of things too in the media. I say, God damn it. I tell thing I've never felt better. Meanwhile, those are just words, man. The proof is in the pudding when you actually take the field at Rogers Center. What do you expect that guy to say? I don't know. Obviously, that guy's going to say, I'm the healthiest I've ever been in my life. Never better. Yeah, ready to go, man. And the guy's going to be on the 60th day within 2 weeks, man. I hope not, but knock on wood, I don't want to jinx the guy. Here's what I would say. If I was the general manager of the Toronto Blue Jays, the one area, the one thing I would kind of, and again, I don't put as much emphasis on Springer and center. I think he's above average center fielder. I wouldn't have made the Hernandez trade, and I'll tell you why. Because essentially Hernandez replaces Kiermaier, really, in the lineup, and they switch positions. Number one, Teoscar Hernandez going into free agency, right? Arbitration, $14 million. Kiermaier makes $9 million, right? For Rogers, that's like 50 cents, the difference of the money. So if you got Teoscar Hernandez in that lineup, right, there's a possibility, Paul Bruno, guys like to make money, right? So in his free agent year, there's a possibility at the All-Star break, this guy's 30 and 100, man, right? Yeah. There's a possibility he's the Silver Slugger, man. There's even a 5% chance he's in the MVP conversation. And that's the one area I believe they didn't really connect with and understand what he could possibly give you when he's hungry. And number two, you'd also have the ability to trade him at the deadline, right? If the season was going sideways, and you can't tell me at the deadline, if this guy's playing good baseball, you can't get more than Swanson on the open market in the trade deadline. For me, that was a no-no, right? And number two, the other thing that I have concern with is, in my estimation, again, Moreno's a generational catcher. Again, this was my early observation in terms of watching him. Bat-to-ball skills behind the plate, his demeanor for a very young guy. He can turn out to be Yadi Molina 2.0, and Kirk in 3 years might be, bludgeoned with knee injuries and kind of on the perennial injured list. Those are the 2 areas I have that kind of concern me. Your thoughts?
All right, let me respond to that. First of all, I think Teoscar Hernandez for any relief pitcher was going to be a bad trade. So I agree with you on that one. You're getting essentially rid of the guy who batted cleanup for the Blue Jays much of last season. Did so with a lot of power, good power numbers, and a pretty good speed on the base paths. Some questionable base running issues were some of the things that the Jays really tired of in his case. Okay, but apart from that, certainly the hitting was there. Silver Slugger candidate every season that he's been with the Jays for my money, and so it was tempered by the defensive miscues and the base running errors. They really tired of him in that regard. And I think that's what greased the rails for his exit. I don't think they got anywhere near proper value in terms of getting Swanson in the fold. I mean, he's got a great strikeout to innings pitch ratio, but he too is only able to pitch 53 innings last year, just the way he was used, I guess. But they need more assets to come back Toronto's way if they're going to get rid of a player of that caliber. So I completely agree with you. The assessment on Moreno may or may not turn out to be true, Billy, but I think getting a decent to good catcher, they are a dime a dozen in the major
Really?
league. Yes. I mean, I don't see him being a generational talent of the ilk of Molina. Not yet. It's way too early to project that. But I think finding a catcher, the Jays organization has actually got a lot of depth at that position going into the minors. And so I'm not as concerned about that loss in terms of the trade assets going out. So for me, I agree with you on point one. I disagree on point number two.
Here's what I would tell you. In my estimation, you brought in the guys, and obviously they served a need. But in my estimation, both for Dalton Varsho and for Swanson and the kid that came over, in my estimation, again, I understand what they're thinking, I understand the needs, and again, but in my estimation, they're both overpays. You give up a guy, a perennial 300 guy in Lourdes Gurriel, again with a 2-cent brain. But 300 is 300 in baseball. There's guys like that don't grow on trees, right? And affordable. You give up a guy like that, and you look at Varsho for all his worth and his defensive metrics and the fact he can catch. He's a 230 guy with a lot of swing and miss in him, eh? So Blue Jay fans, be prepared. Yeah, he'll do some beautiful things, man. But he'll also walk back to the dugout with his head down 150 times. Don't make no mistake about that. So you give up Gurriel, and then you give up one of the top 5 best prospects in baseball by all standards, not just mine, baseball, America, you name it. Anywhere you look, Gabriel Moreno's a top 5 prospect, and those guys don't grow on trees either. So I like the guys you brought in. You overpaid. But if you overpaid and you're right, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If you win, you know what? The trade looks beautiful. If these guys that come in play their parts, do their roles, but obviously, like the elephant in the room is you're still going to have the same shortstop defensively in Bo Bichette. Obviously a generational talent with the bat. Not many guys better, covers everything inside out, upside down, and when he's hot, there's nobody better, man. But you're also talking about a guy with 30 errors. You're talking about a guy that's shaky defensively. Can you win with him in that spot? And why? Why? Do you think the Blue Jays believe that Bo Bichette is a shortstop, or are they scared to tell him he's not?
I think the latter might be the issue. You've touched on a real sore point with me. I think he's miscast as the everyday shortstop, and I too am tired of the error-prone nature of his defensive abilities. It's the routine plays that he throws away. He doesn't make the diving stop and throw it over the first baseman's head. It's the routine balls that come to him that get thrown away inexplicably. Short hops the first baseman too often, for my liking as well. I mean, he made a Gold Glover out of Vlad Guerrero last year because of that. Vladdy got really good at that sort of thing and earned that accolade because he had to in order to prevent more than 30 errors on the ledger. So I'm completely with you on that score, and that's too bad that they haven't been able to address that circumstance. Certainly backing him up at that position is Santiago Espinal. I don't think he proved that he could be an everyday shortstop as an option last year. So that was an area that I think they should have tried to upgrade. There were a number of shortstops, some big name shortstops that moved in the offseason. The Jays didn't pull the trigger on a move like that. It would have been a real good looking lineup if you could have added one of the big names to the mix offensively. But look let's go back a step and say they were an all right-handed pretty much lineup last year in terms of the offensive threats. Brandon Belt is a power hitter. His home run ratio to at bats is remarkable in this guy's career. And in the middle of the lineup, you can expect that Dalton Varsho won't have to carry the load that he did in Arizona. That was one of the poorest lineups top to bottom. So he'll be boosted by the fact that he'll be in a deeper lineup and doesn't have to think he has to yank the ball out of the yard with every swing like he did in Arizona. So I think that you're going to see an offensive spike in his numbers, and those two guys really excite me in terms of adding them into the heart of an already potent Jays offense.
They excite. Again, don't get me wrong. I used the term earlier with the Leafs, cautiously optimistic. Again, they excite me. I just wish you could have got them for a little bit less. For me, on both deals, I wouldn't say you got fleeced. You didn't get fleeced. They're not chopped liver. But in terms of the two trades, I would have expected a less of a cost price when it comes to the acquisition of Dalton Varsho, and I would have did better with Teoscar Hernandez. For me, if you're dealing Teoscar Hernandez, I want a guy like George Kirby on the other end, or a facsimile thereof. Seattle's got a slew of starting pitchers, right? And if you don't go after one of those Seattle starting pitchers, you hang up the phone and find another home for Teoscar. And it's that simple, right? You give them to the first bidder. If you were a little bit patient, you held on, you would have got somebody, because at this point in time, you got Kikuchi and Mitch White as your number 5 starters. And Teoscar Hernandez should have been parlayed into somebody that would take that role. So for me, that error, I wouldn't call it egregious, but it's an oversight, and it's something that I hope doesn't come back to haunt them. Here's what I'll ask you in terms of moving forward. The one area on the ball diamond that's still up for grabs in terms of competition is at second base. If you're skipper of the club or general manager, who's your guy in terms of, obviously you got three. You got Espinal, who I believe is not an everyday player. Besides the point, you got Whit Merrifield and you got Biggio. Who gets the starting call and who gets the majority of the at-bats in that spot?
I say Whit Merrifield does. He's already played in 4 seasons where he's got over 600 at bats, 3 over 700. So that tells me he has had the support of his managers enough to get those numbers of plate appearances, and that's because he's produced. He's an on-base guy that I have a lot of faith in terms of being near the top of the order as a table setter. And again, it speaks to the potent nature of the lineup behind him that I think that he's in line for a very good offensive season with the Blue Jays coming up, and I think he could threaten the 200 hit mark if he can stay healthy. And
it's funny you said that, because again, as much as we like to say Toronto's not a baseball town, like I go through social media, I listen, I just hear, and they're not much of, they don't know how good Whit Merrifield is. You know, you saw last year in terms of some of his metrics early in the season, he had one bad month. I'll tell you folks something, and disagree with me if you dare, Paul. Whit Merrifield is a healthy DJ LeMahieu light. Just underneath, not quite the same player in terms of power, in terms of gap to gap, but he's a similar kind of productive guy that mirrors him. If you want to think of somebody that you can compare him to, that's DJ LeMahieu. And you know the Blue Jays were interested in him at one point in time. And the difference between those two players, even though there's a perception Whit Merrifield's a role guy, a little bit older, you know what? There's an argument to be made that Whit Merrifield is a better player than a healthy DJ LeMahieu. So I'll just leave it at that. We got 5 minutes to go, Paul, so I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you. We got a couple of things in common, obviously. Actually a lot of things in common. Even though I'm a little better looking, probably a little tougher, we got a lot of things in common. And one of those is we both annually feel the pain. And I'm talking about a bad pain. You know, I'm talking about the Dallas Cowboys. So we don't have much time. We could talk about the Cowboys for the next 2 days and still come out with no answers. The question that I ask you moving forward, right, is what in the blue hell do you do with Dak effing Prescott?
I'm with you there. He has not proved the ability to win the big one. I mean, he did beat Tom Brady in the last game of that illustrious career, but that was largely on the basis of the strong defensive performance by the club. He did have a good game then. I won't cut him a little bit of slack in that regard to say he did contribute. But in a game that mattered the following week, he was an absolute key
train wreck.
Yeah, he was just terrible. He cost them 2 drives that were looking really good, turned the ball over on the San Francisco side of the field twice in key circumstances. If you take away those turnovers, that's a very different outcome, that game, and it's on his shoulders. You can't make those critical errors. I mean, in the second half of the NFL season, he led the entire league, in interceptions from the quarterback position, and that just cannot happen with the regularity that it did last season. It really punctured the hopes of the club because they were loaded all over the place. I mean, the 2-headed monster running back, the 3 tight ends that they were able to roll in and out of the lineup, they're a bit deficient at the wide receiver position, but they added T.Y. Hilton to boost that. And the defense, we can go on and on about the stars that dot the defensive side of the ball for this club. So they had a lot of key positions loaded for bear, and because of the quarterback's brain farts, they got beat out in a game that they easily could have won.
Here's what I noticed too. And again, we'll exit. Where's our producer, the esteemed Jordan LaRoche? We're going to go to 8:05. This Cowboy conversation needs 7 minutes at least. We can't finish in 2 minutes, Paul. Here's what I would say from my end. Tell me you agree or disagree. The one thing that I was disappointed in, again, is the decision in Jerry's world in terms of jettisoning Amari Cooper to Cleveland and investing in Michael Gallup, who wasn't healthy enough to start the season, and when he did, coming off an ACL, obviously not the same player that we remembered. If revisionist history being what it is, that's something that I would kind of shake my head at. Do you think, and if you're in the GM spot, Do you consider an upgrade there in terms of not knowing who Gallup is and whether or not he'll ever regain his form, and kind of maybe give Odell Beckham a call and kind of try to see if he's the answer in that spot?
You know what? Odell Beckham has been a real headline grabber, but all indications are the guy is not 100% healthy. That's why nobody picked him up. He did train and present himself as a possibility for a number of different clubs late in the season, but didn't really wow anybody enough. Certainly Jerry would have loved to grab him if he was a truly viable option. But in limited reps, I like what I saw to T.Y. Hilton. And if they can bring him back in the fold, I think he's an upgrade that helps the depth of the wide receiver ranks. I like what I saw of Noah Brown as well. And they've got one of the very best in CD Lamb at the top of the list, of course. You'd love to see Gallup live up to the hype that surrounded him when he was drafted with the club as a high pick, but it really hasn't materialized, and you touched on it. It's been injury issues. So should they add one more good piece at the wide receiver? I'd love to see it, but they're really cash-strapped and salary cap limited right now. That's the problem for this club at this stage, and a large chunk of that change is going into the genes that belong to one Dak Prescott.
And it's funny because, you know, I've been on the fence. Like, I'm a Tony Romo guy going way back, and I believe that if Tony Romo came out of the booth, and again, I don't know, maybe I'm offside on this, but I believe if Tony Romo came out of the booth at the age of 40, didn't even practice, just came out of the booth behind that defense and that running game, I believe they would have beat the San Francisco 49ers. That's my opinion. But that's besides the point. Here's the issue again. You also unfortunate injury to Pollard, who you don't know how he's going to come back from a broken fibula. And again, it's just terrible time for that kid going into free agency. You're a couple of halves away from cashing in, man, a big paycheck, and that happens too. You got to feel bad for the kid. But here's one guy that I don't feel bad for, and that's Zeke Elliott. He's cashed it. You know, he's living a good life, Zeke, in terms of the payday he has in regards to the contribution, especially in the last couple of years. Has he worn a Cowboy uniform for the last time?
I think you might see that be the case, and they'll use that money to try and make sure that Tony Pollard does not escape. Pollard showed me enough that he could be the next one. Zeke has carried the ball with great results for the club, but he's worn out and worn down. I don't think that you can expect him to continue with the trajectory of his early part of his career, but rather you're starting to see a bit of a decline there. And I like the breakaway speed that Pollard offers. That's something that Zeke Elliott's game was not about in the last couple of seasons. He was more of a 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of guy. And behind this offensive line, they should be able to get better. And I think a healthy Tony Pollard fills that role very admirably if he can.
Do you see any? You've been around for a little bit. Do you see any comparison when you're looking at what was a healthy Tony Pollard to Tony Dorsett?
Absolutely. I mean, Tony Dorsett. Now you're dating us here when you think about him, but he is my all-time favorite Dallas Cowboy next to Emmitt Smith, and the Cowboys have been blessed with depth at the running back position. That's Hall of Fame worthy right down the line. And, you know, I think Emmitt Smith is Ezekiel Elliott rather is going to wind up in the Hall of Fame one day too. So they've been really lucky at that position, but certainly Dorsett, I remember back in his college days as a kid, he was my favorite player.
Really?
10-yard sweep left, 10-yard sweep right, play after play for Pitt. It was just so much fun to watch. And I never watched so much college football since, but I did catch every game that I could when he was playing because he was just such a dynamic player, so fast. And who will forget the Monday night game when he
99
and a half yards against Minnesota? That was a great memory for me.
It's funny as we close out the show. It's funny if you watch history. If you look at some of the greatest running backs in terms of college football, it's unbelievable to go back and YouTube guys like I believe that in some ways. College running backs are at their peak at that age. It's the best you'll ever see them when you're talking about guys like Eric Dickerson, who went on to obviously to do unbelievable things. Even if you look at tapes on Herschel Walker in college, unbelievable. Bo Jackson, even at Alabama.
I was going to say, yeah.
Right? You look at some of those guys, man, and like years later, like this is 20 and 30 years ago, and they're still going at speeds that you don't see. Some unbelievable stuff, right? And speaking of unbelievable, Paul, the hours just flew by. I joke around a little bit, but I really enjoy not only the beginning of your friendship, seeing you again, but I really enjoy spending time with you. It's refreshing, obviously, man. Two guys that know a little bit about sports. I'm stuck. Imagine poor me. I'm stuck with a ham and egger like Rumack, man, on a weekly basis. So you know how enjoyable this was for me.
Me too, Billy. Always a pleasure, but I'm not going to stick a knife in Normie's back. You've been awesome to me for many, many years. We've been great friends, and I look forward to the next time where I can be back on with both of you guys together.
So what you're telling the people is rumors of Norman's expiration in career and death are been greatly exaggerated. That's what you're suggesting.
I would fight for his reinstatement. That's what I'm telling you.
Man, a lot of people he's a beauty too, man. And we look forward to not only me and Norm next week with special advisor of the Florida Panthers, Rick Dudley, but we're going to definitely make sure that we give the call again close to playoff time. You know when we're going to reach out, Paul? We're going to reach out to you maybe close to playoff time after the deadline when everything is pretty well sealed in terms of the roster, and we'll get you on board again and touch base. But unfortunately, it's going to be with Rumack too, so we might not be able to share the microphone and speak, man. That guy talks a lot, you know that, but well, whatever. Tell the people before they get going what you're doing nowadays and where they can reach you in terms of the fine work that you do.
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Statsman22. You can listen to my weekly pod at RotoWire. We talk hockey for an hour and a half with my co-host AJ Scholes out of RotoWire headquarters in Wisconsin. And on a daily basis, you can see me on the DraftKings show, The Sweat. It's a morning run from 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock in the Eastern time zone, where we talk all sports. But of course, I'm featured in terms of hockey talk and baseball talk Monday to Friday on the DraftKings network. And thanks for letting me plug both of them.
Hold on. So if I hold on, it's not that easy. If I tune into the DraftKings network, where can I tell me? Because again, I'm not the smartest of guys. Where can I find this?
You go on Twitter and you find the DraftKings Sportsbook, or just follow DraftKings, and you will be able to locate their show called The Sweat, and you'll be able to log on and listen to it live, or you can look into the archives anytime later in the day, download those hits, and be able to listen to our reporting.
All right, okay. So if I log on tomorrow, man, is there gonna be a little shout out, man, at some point in time for Billy the Greek?
I'm not a host. I'm a guest in those circumstances, so I get to talk about the games and the games only. So I don't get an opportunity.
Hold on, Paul. Hold on. Let's negotiate here. Say a good friend of mine out of Toronto, the Greek man, give me a little bit of inside scoops. Radko Gudas to the Toronto Maple Leafs. I want to tune in, on a reliable source, Paul. As you know, I'm top of the line. Radko Gudas to the Leafs, courtesy of Billy the Greek. Is that on, Paul Bruno?
If that happens, you're going to get full credit from me. I promise.
Absolutely, man. Pleasure once again. Thank you guys for watching. Pleasure. We appreciate each and every one of you. Central Ontario Standardbred Association, Carpets for Life, and our esteemed producer, Jordan LaRoche. On behalf of Billy the Greek, that's Paul Bruno. Catch me and Rumack next Monday. Thanks, folks. Take good care.